Silence speaks before words ever do, long before affection is named, before commitment is defined, before intimacy is spoken aloud. Desire reveals itself through questions, not shallow questions, not polite conversation, but questions that reach beneath the surface, questions that test safety, questions that search for presence. A woman who wants intimacy with you will not begin by demanding your body or your promises. She will ask you two things that expose who you really are and whether you are capable of meeting her where intimacy truly lives. The world has confused intimacy with attraction, chemistry, and physical closeness, but intimacy is not created by touch. It is created by trust. It is not sustained by passion. It is sustained by presence. And a woman who desires intimacy understands this intuitively. She knows that what she is really seeking is not attention, but alignment, not excitement, but emotional safety, not words, but consistency. So she asks questions, not to interrogate you, but to understand whether your inner world is a place she can rest. Intimacy is often misunderstood because the world teaches that attraction is a starting point of connection. We are told that if two people feel chemistry, if there is excitement, desire, and emotional pull, intimacy will naturally follow. But attraction is only a doorway, not a foundation. It can open interest, but it cannot sustain closeness. True intimacy begins where trust is established, not where attraction is felt. Attraction can be instant, but trust is built. And without trust, what looks like intimacy is only proximity. Trust creates the environment where intimacy can exist without fear. When trust is present, a person does not feel the need to perform, impress, or protect themselves constantly. They feel safe enough to reveal their inner world. This is why intimacy is not about how close two bodies are, but how safe two hearts feel. You can be physically close to someone and emotionally distant at the same time. But when trust is present, even silence feels connected. Attraction focuses on what draws us in. Trust focuses on what keeps us grounded. Attraction says, I want you. Trust says, I am safe with you. One is fueled by desire, the other by security. And while desire can fade and fluctuate, security deepens over time. This is why relationships built only on attraction often feel intense at first and empty later. They lack the structure required to hold emotional weight. Trust is formed through consistency, honesty, and emotional presence. It grows when words and actions align, when promises are honored, and when someone shows up not just when it is convenient, but when it is difficult. Intimacy depends on this reliability. Without it, vulnerability feels risky, and without vulnerability, intimacy cannot grow. A woman seeking intimacy understands this instinctively. She is not simply responding to how she feels around someone. She is paying attention to how safe she feels with them. Safety is not the absence of conflict, but the assurance that conflict will not lead to abandonment, ridicule, or emotional withdrawal. Trust tells her that her emotions will be handled with care, not used against her. Attraction can exist in uncertainty. Trust cannot. Attraction thrives on mystery and excitement, but intimacy requires clarity and stability. This is why trust must come first. Without trust, emotional closeness becomes fragile, easily threatened by misunderstanding, silence, or inconsistency. With trust, intimacy becomes resilient, able to withstand pressure and growth. Many people confuse intensity with intimacy. They believe that strong emotions, constant communication, or overwhelming desire means something deep is happening. But intensity without trust creates emotional highs, followed by emotional crashes. It produces anxiety, not peace. True intimacy feels steady, not chaotic. It feels secure, not uncertain. Trust also allows truth to exist without fear. When trust is present, honesty is not punished. A person can express discomfort, disagreement, or emotional needs without worrying that the connection will collapse. This freedom is essential for intimacy. Without it, people begin to hide parts of themselves to preserve the relationship, and intimacy slowly disappears. Attraction draws attention to the surface. Trust invites exploration of the depths. Attraction can spark interest, but trust allows understanding. Attraction can initiate connection, but trust sustains it. When trust leads, intimacy grows naturally without force or pressure. This is why intimacy cannot be rushed. Trust takes time, observation, and shared experience. It is built in moments of listening, patience, and follow-through. It is strengthened when someone remains present during vulnerability instead of retreating. It is proven when actions remain consistent over time. When intimacy is rooted in trust, it becomes transformative. It allows two people to grow without fear of losing connection. It creates a space where both individuals can evolve while remaining emotionally connected. This kind of intimacy does not drain, it restores. It does not confuse, it clarifies. Attraction may open the door, but trust decides whether anyone stays. And when trust is placed at the center, intimacy becomes not just possible, but enduring. A woman who is seeking intimacy is not primarily searching for admiration or approval. She is searching for a space where she can exist fully and honestly. When she asks in visible or subtle ways whether she can be herself with you, she is not testing your patience or your tolerance. She is discerning your capacity for emotional safety. This question sits at the core of intimacy because no deep connection can survive where authenticity is restricted. Intimacy requires freedom, and freedom begins with acceptance. Being herself means more than expressing opinions or sharing interests. It means revealing emotions without being minimized, sharing thoughts without being corrected, and expressing needs without being made to feel burdensome. A woman who wants intimacy is watching how you respond to these moments. She notices whether her openness is met with curiosity or judgment, whether her vulnerability is met with care or discomfort. These responses tell her whether your presence is a place she can rest or a place she must constantly manage. Authenticity is fragile. When someone begins to reveal their inner world, they are taking a risk. They are saying, "This is who I am. Will you still stay?" A woman asking if she can be herself with you is asking if her truth will be honored rather than controlled. She is paying attention to whether you allow her to exist as a whole person, not just the parts of her that are easy, agreeable, or pleasing. Many connections fail at this point because people confuse acceptance with agreement. Allowing someone to be themselves does not require you to share every belief or preference. It requires respect. Intimacy grows when differences are held with maturity, not used as weapons. When a woman feels she must constantly defend her perspective or soften her truth to maintain harmony, intimacy slowly erodes. What remains may look like closeness, but it is built on suppression, not connection. A woman who wants intimacy is also attentive to how safe it feels to express emotion. Can she share joy without it being dismissed? Can she share sadness without being rushed? Can she express frustration without being labeled as difficult? Emotional safety is revealed not in moments of agreement, but in moments of tension. How you handle those moments answers her question more clearly than any reassurance ever could. Listening plays a crucial role here. True listening is not about preparing a response or offering immediate solutions. It is about presence. It communicates that her experience matters, that her voice has weight. When a woman feels genuinely heard, she feels valued. And feeling valued is essential to intimacy. Without it, vulnerability becomes exhausting and silence becomes safer than honesty. A woman asking if she can be herself with you is also observing whether you respect her boundaries. Intimacy does not require constant access or emotional exposure. It requires choice. When boundaries are honored, trust deepens. When boundaries are dismissed, intimacy feels invasive rather than connecting. Respect for boundaries tells her that her autonomy is safe with you, and autonomy is essential for authentic closeness. This question also touches identity. Can she grow with you, or must she remain static to keep the connection? Intimacy thrives in environments where growth is encouraged, not threatened. If her evolution is met with insecurity, control, or resistance, she learns that being herself comes at a cost, and no intimacy can survive where self-expression requires self-betrayal. When a woman feels she can be herself, her guard lowers naturally. She does not need to impress or perform. Her openness becomes effortless. Not because she feels entitled to closeness, but because she feels safe enough to offer it. Intimacy offered freely is always deeper than intimacy extracted through pressure. If the answer to her question is yes, I can be myself with you, then intimacy begins to form organically. Emotional closeness deepens, trust strengthens, connection becomes grounded rather than fragile. But if the answer is no, she may remain physically present while emotionally distant, or she may slowly withdraw altogether, not because she lacks interest, but because intimacy cannot grow where authenticity is restricted. In the end, this question is less about compatibility and more about emotional capacity. It reveals whether your presence creates space or demands adjustment. Intimacy flourishes where a woman feels free to be fully herself and safe, knowing she will still be met with respect, care, and consistency. One of the most misunderstood truths about intimacy is the belief that closeness requires constant agreement. Many people assume that love is proven by sameness, that harmony means never challenging one another, and that disagreement is a threat to connection. But intimacy does not grow from agreement. It grows from acceptance. Agreement may create comfort, but acceptance creates safety. And safety is the soil where intimacy takes root. Acceptance says, you are allowed to be who you are in my presence. It does not demand sameness of thought, personality, or perspective. It recognizes that two whole individuals can stand side by side without needing to merge into one. A woman who desires intimacy is not searching for someone who mirrors her opinions or validates every feeling. She is searching for someone who respects her humanity, even when her views differ from theirs. When acceptance is present, differences do not feel dangerous. They become opportunities for ending rather than battles to be won. Disagreement handled with maturity does not push people apart. It often brings them closer. It communicates emotional strength, not weakness. It shows that the connection is strong enough to hold complexity, not just comfort. Many relationships fracture because one person feels they must abandon parts of themselves to keep peace. They learn that certain thoughts are unwelcome, certain emotions are inconvenient, and certain truths are better left unspoken. Over time, this creates emotional distance. What looks like harmony on the surface hides quiet resentment underneath. Intimacy cannot survive where self-censorship becomes a requirement. A woman who wants intimacy pays close attention to how disagreement is handled. She notices whether her differing opinion is met with curiosity or contempt. She senses whether she is being heard or merely tolerated until she conforms. These moments reveal whether acceptance is real or conditional. Conditional acceptance feels like love only when she agrees. True acceptance remains steady even when perspectives clash. Acceptance does not mean emotional passivity. It does not mean ignoring harmful behavior or abandoning personal values. It means addressing differences without demeaning the person who holds them. It means separating identity from opinion. When a woman feels respected, even while being challenged, trust deepens. When she feels dismissed or belittled, intimacy retreats. This is especially important in moments of vulnerability. When someone shares something deeply personal, an insecurity, a fear, a wound from the past, they are not asking to be corrected. They are asking to be held with care. Acceptance in these moments communicates. Your experience matters, even if I don't fully understand it. That message alone can strengthen emotional bonds more than any agreement ever could. Disagreement handled without acceptance often turns into defensiveness. Conversations become competitions instead of connections. The goal shifts from understanding to winning, and once winning becomes more important than understanding, intimacy begins to die. Acceptance keeps the focus on relationship rather than ego. A woman seeking intimacy wants to know that her voice does not threaten the connection. She wants to know that she can speak honestly without triggering withdrawal, anger, or emotional shutdown. Acceptance reassures her that the relationship is not fragile, that it can withstand truth without breaking. When acceptance is missing, people begin to perform. They say what is safe instead of what is true. They become agreeable instead of authentic. Over time, this performance becomes exhausting. Intimacy fades not because love was absent, but because acceptance was. Acceptance also creates room for growth. When people feel accepted, they are more open to reflection and change. Growth that emerges from safety is far more lasting than growth forced through criticism. A woman who feels accepted is more likely to explore herself, evolve emotionally, and deepen the connection because she does not fear losing belonging in the process. Agreement may make things easier in the moment, but acceptance makes things stronger in the long run. It builds resilience. It allows two people to remain connected through seasons of change. It creates a bond rooted in respect rather than control. At its core, acceptance communicates this powerful truth. I see you and I still choose to stay. That choice is what intimacy is built on, not the absence of difference, but the presence of respect, not the avoidance of tension, but the ability to navigate it with care. When acceptance leads, intimacy becomes expansive rather than restrictive. It invites honesty instead of silence. It fosters connection instead of conformity. And it reminds a woman that she does not have to disappear to be loved. She can remain fully herself and still be met with commitment, respect, and emotional safety. Emotional safety is not declared, it is demonstrated. It is revealed most clearly in moments when someone chooses to be vulnerable, when they lower their guard and expose something tender, uncertain, or painful. A woman who desires intimacy is deeply attentive to how these moments are handled because vulnerability is where trust is either strengthened or broken. How you respond in these moments speaks louder than reassurance ever could. Vulnerability is an act of courage. When someone shares a fear, an insecurity, a past wound, or unmet need, they're placing something fragile in your hands. They are not asking for solutions, corrections, or explanations. They are asking for presence. They are asking whether their openness will be met with care or discomfort. Your response answers that question instantly. Many people unintentionally damage intimacy by rushing to fix what was never meant to be solved. Offering advice too quickly can feel dismissive, as though the emotion itself is a problem rather than a reality to be acknowledged. A woman opening up is not always seeking answers. Often she is seeking understanding. When her vulnerability is met with patience instead of pressure, she feels seen. When it is met with presence instead of avoidance, she feels valued. Defensiveness is another common threat to emotional safety. When vulnerability is interpreted as criticism or threat, conversations shift from connection to self-protection. A woman who shares how something made her feel is not attacking, she is trusting. If that trust is met with denial, justification, or minimization, she learns that honesty leads to conflict rather than closeness. Over time, she may choose silence over vulnerability, not because she lacks depth, but because safety is missing. Emotional safety is also revealed through consistency and emotional presence. Being available only when conversations are light or positive sends a clear message. Depth is unwelcome. A woman seeking intimacy notices whether you remain present when emotions become heavy. Do you stay engaged when the conversation requires empathy, or do you withdraw when it becomes uncomfortable? Presence in difficult moments builds trust more powerfully than charm in easy ones. Listening without interruption plays a crucial role here. True listening communicates respect. It tells her that her thoughts deserve space and her feelings deserve time. Interrupting, correcting, or redirecting the conversation can make vulnerability feel unsafe. When someone feels rushed or unheard, they internalize the message that their emotional expression is inconvenient. Emotional safety also includes emotional regulation. How you manage your own reactions matters. Raised voices, sarcasm, or emotional shutdowns can make vulnerability feel dangerous. A calm, grounded response reassures her that emotions will not escalate into chaos. Stability in your reactions creates stability in the connection. Validation is another key component. Validation does not mean agreeing with everything she feels or believes. It means acknowledging her experience as real and meaningful. Saying, I can see why that hurt you, or that makes sense given what you went through, communicates empathy. Dismissing emotions with phrases that minimize or invalidate creates distance, not intimacy. When emotional safety is present, vulnerability becomes easier over time. Trust deepens, conversations grow richer. The connection moves beyond surface-level interaction into something meaningful and lasting. But when emotional safety is be sent, vulnerability feels risky. People begin to share less, not because they have nothing to say, but because they have learned it is safer to withhold. A woman seeking intimacy will not demand emotional safety with words. She will look for it in behavior. She will observe whether you protect her openness or expose it. She will notice whether you remember what she shares, respect its sensitivity, and handle it with care. Emotional safety is built through repeated experiences of being met with understanding rather than judgment. Ultimately, emotional safety answers a silent but powerful question: if I show you who I really am, will you stay? When the answer is yes, through presence, patience, and empathy, intimacy grows naturally. When the answer is uncertain, vulnerability retreats. Intimacy cannot exist without vulnerability, and vulnerability cannot exist without emotional safety. The way you respond in moments of openness determines whether closeness deepens or distance grows. Emotional safety is not created by perfection, but by consistency in care. And when someone feels emotionally safe, intimacy stops feeling risky and starts feeling natural. Consistency is the quiet language of commitment. It does not announce itself loudly, yet it speaks more clearly than words ever could. A woman seeking intimacy is not drawn to moments of intensity alone. She is drawn to patterns that feel reliable. Consistency creates emotional security, and without emotional security, intimacy becomes unstable. What feels exciting at first can quickly become exhausting when it lacks steadiness. Emotional security is built when someone knows what to expect, not in terms of perfection, but in presence. Consistency reassures her that connection will not disappear without explanation, that care will not fluctuate with mood, and that interest will not fade the moment effort is required. This reliability allows her nervous system to relax, and intimacy can only grow when anxiety is not constantly triggered. Many people confuse intensity with depth. They believe that strong emotions, frequent communication, or passionate expression are signs of genuine connection. But intensity without consistency creates emotional highs followed by emotional uncertainty. It keeps someone guessing, questioning, and doubting. A woman who desires intimacy does not want to guess where she stands. She wants clarity, stability, and follow-through. Consistency shows itself in small, repeated actions. It is revealed in keeping promises, in responding, when communication is expected, and in showing up even when circumstances are not ideal. These actions communicate that the connection is not dependent on convenience. They show that presence is intentional, not accidental. When consistency is missing, insecurity takes its place. Mixed signals create confusion. Hot and cold behavior erodes trust. Silence where communication once existed creates doubt. Over time, this unpredictability causes emotional withdrawal. A woman may still care deeply, but she will protect herself by limiting vulnerability. Intimacy cannot survive where emotional self-protection becomes necessary. Consistency also communicates respect. It tells her that her time, emotions, and energy are valued. Inconsistent behavior often sends the opposite message, even if unintentionally. It can make someone feel like an option rather than a priority, like something that can be picked up or put down without consideration. Emotional security depends on feeling chosen, not just desired. This does not mean constant availability or perfection. Consistency does not require being present every moment. It requires honesty and reliability. When expectations are clear and communication is steady, trust grows. A woman seeking intimacy understands that life has demands and challenges, but she also recognizes when effort is genuine and when absence is avoidable. Consistency also builds confidence in the future of the connection. It allows her to invest emotionally without fear of sudden withdrawal. Without consistency, intimacy feels like a risk with no safety net. With consistency, intimacy feels like a shared journey rather than a fragile moment. Emotional security deepens when words align with actions. Promises followed by behavior reinforce trust. When someone says they care and consistently demonstrates it, belief forms naturally. But when words are not matched, head by actions, doubt grows, regardless of how sincere those words sound. A woman watches patterns because patterns reveal truth. Consistency also creates a rhythm in the relationship. It establishes a sense of emotional predictability that allows both people to relax into connection. When emotional presence becomes dependable, intimacy stops feeling urgent or desperate. It becomes calm, steady, and nourishing. Inconsistent connections often create emotional imbalance. One person invests more, waits more, and hopes more, while the other remains unpredictable. This imbalance breeds resentment and insecurity. A woman seeking intimacy wants mutual effort, not emotional chasing. Consistency creates equality in emotional investment. Ultimately, consistency answers the question of safety. It says you don't have to brace yourself for disappointment. It allows intimacy to grow without fear. When emotional security is present, vulnerability becomes easier, trust deepens, and connection strengthens naturally. Intensity may spark interest, but consistency sustains intimacy. Without it, closeness remains fragile. With it, intimacy becomes stable, grounded, and lasting. Words have the power to inspire, reassure, and create hope, but they are incomplete without action. A woman seeking intimacy understands this deeply. She listens to what is said, but she believes what is shown. This is why words mean little without matching actions. Intimacy is not built on promises spoken in moments of emotion. It is built on behavior repeated over time. Actions give language its credibility. When words and actions align, trust grows naturally. There is no need for constant reassurance because consistency speaks for itself. But when words and actions are disconnected, confusion follows. A woman may hear expressions of care, commitment, or interest, yet feel uncertainty because behavior does not reinforce those claims. This disconnect creates emotional instability and makes intimacy feel unsafe. Many people speak with sincerity in the moment. They express what they feel right then without considering whether they can sustain it. But intimacy requires more than emotional expression. It requires integrity. Integrity is the alignment between intention and behavior. A woman seeking intimacy is not impressed by eloquence or emotional declarations. She is attentive to follow through. Actions reveal priorities. Time spent, effort invested, and consistency maintained all demonstrate what truly matters. When someone says they care but repeatedly fails to show up, respond, or follow through, the message received is not the words but the absence of action. Over time, this absence erodes trust and weakens emotional connection. A woman observes patterns rather than isolated moments. Anyone can be attentive occasionally, loving briefly, or present when it is easy. Intimacy is revealed in what remains consistent when circumstances change. Do actions remain steady when stress increases? Does care persist when excitement fades? These moments reveal whether words are grounded in reality or driven by impulse. When actions contradict words, emotional doubt emerges. A woman may begin to question not only the connection but her own perception. This uncertainty creates emotional fatigue. Instead of feeling secure, she feels the need to analyze, interpret, and protect herself. Intimacy cannot thrive in an environment of constant emotional vigilance. Matching actions to words also communicates respect. It shows that what has been expressed is taken seriously enough to be honored. Broken promises, even small ones, chip away at trust. Each unfulfilled commitment sends a message that words are flexible, but reliability is optional. A woman seeking intimacy looks for evidence. Hence, that commitment is valued, not just spoken. Actions also reveal emotional availability. Consistent presence, attentiveness, and responsiveness demonstrate that emotional investment is real. Without these behaviors, verbal expressions of care feel hollow. Intimacy requires embodied presence, not just verbal affirmation. This does not mean perfection. Mistakes happen. Life intervenes. What matters is accountability. When actions fall short, acknowledgement and repair restore trust. Ignoring the gap between words and actions widens it. A woman who wants intimacy pays attention to whether accountability exists, because accountability signals emotional maturity. Over time, consistent action builds emotional confidence. It allows a woman to relax into the connection rather than constantly seeking reassurance. She does not need repeated explanations if behavior already communicates stability. Trust grows quietly through reliability. When words and actions align, intimacy feels grounded. There is no confusion about intentions, no need to decipher mixed signals. Closeness feels safe because behavior confirms what is spoken. This alignment allows vulnerability to deepen without fear of disappointment. Ultimately, words may introduce connection, but actions sustain it. A woman seeking intimacy does not ask for grand declarations. She looks for steady presence. She believes what is lived, not what is promised. And when actions consistently support words, intimacy becomes not just possible, but secure and enduring. Inconsistency creates uncertainty, and uncertainty breeds anxiety. When emotional signals fluctuate, intimacy becomes fragile rather than secure. A woman seeking intimacy is not simply reacting to behavior in the moment. She is responding to the emotional environment being created over time. Inconsistency disrupts that environment. It replaces trust with do. EBT and turns connection into something that must be monitored rather than enjoyed. Anxiety does not arise because someone cares too much. It arises because stability is missing. When affection, attention, or communication appears and disappears without explanation, the mind searches for meaning. A woman begins to question where she stands, what changed, and whether she did something wrong. This internal questioning pulls her out of the connection and into self-protection. Intimacy cannot grow when emotional energy is spent on uncertainty. Mixed signals are one of the most damaging forms of inconsistency. Saying one thing and doing another. Being warm one day and distant the next creates emotional confusion. It forces someone to read between the lines instead of trusting what is being shown. Over time, this erodes emotional confidence. A woman may still feel attraction, but she no longer feels safe enough to be open. Inconsistent behavior also disrupts emotional rhythm. Intimacy thrives on predictability, not monotony, but emotional predictability. Knowing that care will not suddenly vanish allows vulnerability to deepen. When emotional presence is unpredictable, vulnerability feels risky. A woman begins to pace her openness, revealing less to protect herself from disappointment. Anxiety caused by inconsistency often manifests as overthinking. Simple delays feel significant. Silence feels loaded. Neutral moments feel threatening. This is not emotional weakness. It is a natural response to instability. The nervous system seeks patterns to determine safety. When patterns are inconsistent, the system remains on alert. Intimacy requires calm, not constant alertness. Inconsistent communication is especially damaging. When communication shifts without explanation, it creates a sense of emotional abandonment. A woman may feel close one moment and disconnected the next, without understanding why. This unpredictability makes intimacy feel unreliable. Over time, emotional distance grows as a form of self-defense. Inconsistency also undermines trust in words. When behavior changes without clarity, reassurance loses its power. Even sincere explanations may not fully repair the damage if inconsistency continues. Trust is rebuilt through stability, not repetition of promises. A woman seeking intimacy desires emotional clarity. She wants to know where she stands without having to ask repeatedly. Consistent behavior communicates intention more effectively than emotional declarations. When that consistency is absent, intimacy feels conditional, dependent on mood or circumstance. Inconsistent presence can also create power imbalance. One person waits, hopes, and adjusts, while the other controls the rhythm of connection through unpredictability. This imbalance breeds resentment and emotional fatigue. Intimacy cannot exist where one person feels they must earn stability. Over time, anxiety replaces closeness. The connection becomes emotionally draining rather than nourishing. Even moments of affection feel temporary, overshadowed by the fear of withdrawal. A woman may still desire intimacy, but she learns that pursuing it in an inconsistent environment leads to pain. True intimacy requires emotional reliability. It grows where signals are clear, behavior is steady, and communication is transparent. Without these, anxiety becomes the dominant emotional experience, pushing intimacy further away. Inconsistency does not create mystery, it creates insecurity, and insecurity suffocates closeness. A woman seeking intimacy will eventually choose peace over confusion. When stability is missing, she protects herself by stepping back, not because she lacks depth or desire, but because intimacy cannot survive where anxiety lives. Intimacy is not sustained by feelings alone, it is sustained by responsibility. Emotional closeness requires more than attraction and affection. It requires the willingness to be accountable for how one shows up in another person's life. A woman seeking intimacy understands that connection without responsibility quickly becomes unstable. What holds intimacy together over time is emotional maturity, not emotional intensity. Responsibility in intimacy begins with self-awareness. It requires recognizing how your words, actions, and reactions affect someone else. Without self-awareness, even good intentions can cause harm. A woman who desires intimacy is attentive to whether you reflect on your behavior or deflect when issues arise. Deflection signals emotional immaturity. Reflection signals growth. Emotional maturity is revealed in how conflict is handled. Conflict is inevitable, but intimacy depends on whether it leads to understanding or withdrawal. An emotionally mature response does not avoid difficult conversations, nor does it escalate them unnecessarily. It seeks clarity rather than control. A woman watches whether you can remain present during discomfort without becoming defensive or dismissive. Responsibility also involves ownership. When mistakes are made, emotional maturity shows itself through accountability. A simple acknowledgement of impact can restore trust more effectively than elaborate explanations. Avoiding responsibility damages intimacy because it communicates that protecting ego matters more than protecting the connection. Intimacy also requires the ability to regulate emotions. Emotional volatility makes closeness unsafe. When reactions are unpredictable, vulnerability feels risky. Emotional maturity provides stability. It allows space for expression without fear of emotional backlash. A woman seeking intimacy pays close attention to whether emotional expression leads to dialogue or emotional shutdown. Responsibility includes consistency and effort. Emotional availability cannot be occasional if intimacy is to grow. Responsibility means showing up not only when it feels good, but when it requires effort. A woman does not expect perfection, but she does expect reliability. Reliability demonstrates commitment to the connection rather than convenience. Another aspect of emotional maturity is empathy. Empathy allows someone to consider another person's experience without centering their own discomfort. A woman seeking intimacy values empathy because it reassures her that her emotions will not be minimized or overshadowed. Empathy deepens understanding and strengthens emotional bonds. Responsibility in intimacy also involves boundaries. Emotional maturity respects boundaries rather than resenting them. Boundaries create safety, not distance. When boundaries are honored, trust grows. When boundaries are violated, intimacy feels invasive. A woman seeking intimacy looks for someone who understands that closeness does not erase individuality. Avoiding responsibility often looks like blaming circumstances, stress, or the other person. While life pressures are real, consistently using them as excuses erodes trust. Emotional maturity acknowledges challenges without allowing them to justify emotional absence. Intimacy requires intentional effort, even in imperfect conditions. Responsibility also means communicating clearly. Ambiguity breeds insecurity. Emotional maturity values clarity over avoidance. Honest communication allows intimacy to grow without confusion. A woman seeking intimacy feels safer when expectations are expressed rather than implied. Ultimately, intimacy requires choosing growth over comfort. Emotional maturity does not mean having everything figured out. It means being willing to learn. It means acknowledging limitations and working toward improvement. A woman seeking intimacy is not looking for flawlessness. She is looking for effort, accountability, and emotional presence. Intimacy without responsibility is fragile. It may feel powerful in moments, but it lacks the structure needed to endure. Emotional maturity provides that structure. When responsibility is embraced, intimacy becomes resilient, respectful, and deeply fulfilling. A woman who seeks true intimacy does not rush closeness, and she does not force connection. She leads with discernment, not pressure. This is often misunderstood because discernment is quiet, observant, and patient, while pressure is loud, urgent, and demanding. Discernment watches before it invests. It evaluates before it commits. And a woman who values intimacy understands that moving too fast can feel exciting, but it rarely feels safe. Discernment is not emotional distance. It is emotional wisdom. It is the ability to pause long enough to understand what is being built. A woman who desires intimacy is not withholding affection as a tactic. She is protecting her emotional world until she knows it is safe to open. She understands that intimacy is not proven by speed, but by stability. Pressure rushes closeness. Discernment allows closeness to emerge naturally. When a woman uses discernment, she pays attention to patterns rather than promises. She notices how someone behaves over time, not just how they speak in moments of emotion. She observes consistency, emotional availability, and integrity. This is not skepticism, it is self-respect. She knows that intimacy given too early can be costly if it is not met with care. Pressure often disguises itself as passion. It pushes for quick emotional access, rapid vulnerability, or premature commitment. But pressure creates imbalance. It asks for intimacy before trust has been established. A woman seeking intimacy recognizes that pressure ignores process. It prioritizes desire over safety. Discernment, on the other hand, honors timing. It allows trust to form layer by layer. A woman using discernment does not need to demand reassurance. She watches how reassurance is offered naturally through behavior. She does not need to chase clarity. She notices whether clarity is freely given. Discernment listens more than it speaks. It observes emotional responses, communication patterns, and follow-through. These observations guide her decisions far more than emotional intensity ever could. This approach often gets misunderstood as hesitation or distance. But discernment is not fear, it is intention. It is the understanding that intimacy, once given, changes everything. A woman knows that emotional closeness creates attachment, and attachment deserves protection. She is not afraid of intimacy. She respects it too much to give it carelessly. Pressure seeks certainty immediately. Discernment allows uncertainty while trust is being formed. A woman who values intimacy understands that uncertainty is not a threat. Rushing is. She allows space for questions to be answered through experience rather than words alone. This patience creates a stronger foundation for intimacy. Discernment also protects against emotional manipulation. Pressure often demands proof of care through accelerated closeness. Discernment refuses to perform intimacy for approval. A woman who discerns does not feel obligated to expose herself emotionally to earn connection. She knows that genuine intimacy does not require persuasion or urgency. When discernment is present, intimacy develops organically. Emotional closeness grows in response to safety, not insistence. Vulnerability unfolds naturally when trust is demonstrated consistently. This kind of intimacy feels calm rather than frantic. It feels ground, dead rather than overwhelming. A woman who uses discernment also understands her own boundaries. She knows what she's ready to give and when. Pressure attempts to override those boundaries. Discernment honors them. By doing so, she ensures that when intimacy does arrive, it is mutual and balanced, not forced or uneven. Discernment is also an act of self-love. It communicates my heart matters. It refuses to confuse availability with obligation. A woman seeking intimacy does not measure connection by how quickly someone wants access to her inner world. She measures it by how responsibly that access is handled. When intimacy is built through discernment, it is less likely to collapse under stress. It has been tested through time, observation, and emotional consistency. It is not built on urgency, but on understanding. This kind of intimacy is resilient because it was chosen, not rushed. In the end, discernment is not a barrier to intimacy. It is the pathway to it. Pressure may create quick attachment, but discernment creates lasting connection. A woman who desires intimacy does not push her way into closeness. She listens, watches, and allows truth to reveal itself. And when she finally steps forward emotionally, it is not because she was convinced, but because she feels safe enough to stay. Lasting intimacy is not accidental. It is earned through presence and respect shown consistently over time. It is not created by charm, attraction, or emotional intensity alone, but by the steady experience of being valued as a whole person. A woman seeking true intimacy is not simply drawn to how someone makes her feel in moments. She is attentive to how she is treated across time. Presence and respect form the foundation of intimacy that endures. Presence is more than physical availability. It is emotional attentiveness. It is the willingness to be fully engaged, to listen without distraction, and to remain connected even when the conversation is uncomfortable or the moment is inconvenient. Emotional presence communicates importance. It tells her that she is not an afterthought, not a distraction, and not a temporary interest. Respect is revealed in how someone honors boundaries, listens to perspective, and values autonomy. A woman seeking intimacy pays attention to whether her voice is considered or overridden, whether her needs are acknowledged or minimized. Respect creates equality. Without it, intimacy becomes imbalanced, with one person adjusting while the other dominates. Presence without respect can feel intrusive. Respect without presence can feel distant. Intimacy requires both. When presence is paired with respect, closeness feels safe rather than overwhelming. A woman can relax into the connection because she does not feel pressured to perform or guarded against being disregarded. Respect also shows itself in consistency of behavior. Showing up when it matters, keeping commitments, and communicating honestly all demonstrate respect. When someone's presence is unpredictable, respect feels questionable. Stability reassures her that care is not conditional or situational. Lasting intimacy also requires patience. Presence is not about demanding closeness. It is about allowing it to grow. A woman seeking intimacy appreciates someone who is willing to build connection slowly and thoughtfully rather than rushing emotional access. Patience communicates value. It says, "You are worth the time it takes to do this well." Respect includes emotional consideration. It involves recognizing how words and actions affect someone else. Thoughtlessness, even when unintentional, can erode intimacy. Consideration strengthens it. A woman feels respected when her emotional experience is taken seriously, not dismissed or overlooked. Presence also means staying when things are difficult. Emotional intimacy deepens when someone remains engaged through conflict, stress, or uncertainty. Leaving emotionally during challenging moments communicates conditional care. Staying present communicates commitment. This reliability allows intimacy to deepen without fear. Lasting intimacy is built through repeated experiences of being chosen. When someone consistently chooses presence, listens with respect, and acts with integrity, trust forms naturally. Over time, this trust becomes the anchor of the connection. Intimacy stops feeling fragile and begins to feel secure. Respect also means allowing individuality. Intimacy does not require control or possession. A woman seeking intimacy wants to remain herself while being connected. When individuality is honored, closeness becomes enriching rather than restrictive. Ultimately, lasting intimacy is not sustained by grand gestures, but by daily demonstrations of care. Presence in conversation, respect in disagreement, and consistency in action create a connection that can endure change and challenge. A woman who feels seen, valued, and respected does not have to wonder where she stands. When presence and respect are offered freely and consistently, intimacy becomes something that grows naturally. It is no longer forced or fragile. It becomes a shared space of trust, understanding, and mutual care, strong enough to last and gentle enough to feel like home.